How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga. Today is Thursday, July 25th, and I have another great show planned for you guys around the NFL. A lot of things to talk about, mostly still on training camp and some contract situations going on. We're going to start off with talking about the Bengals and some of the comments their owner, Mike Brown, made in regards to Jamar Chase and contrasting comments that he made with T. Higgins. So, interesting point of view there from Mike Brown that we're going to get into. Then, more on Hassan Reddick, going through the chain of events that happened that led to him holding out at this point in training camp, and when could we expect something to get done. Then also, Kyle Shanahan appeared on the Athletics, one of the Athletics shows this week, talking about Brock Purdy, talking about the current situation with every contract negotiation he has to get done, and also Bill Belichick almost joining their roster as a defensive coordinator. That'll be in the first half of the show. We'll get to the other half later on in the show. But for right now, before I get started, I'd like to remind you guys, if you have any comments or questions you'd like to make, to use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net. By using that link, I'm able to see your question or comment. I can read it out loud and just carry the conversation probably somewhere else, get your guys' thoughts on anything I say or on any of the topics. And it's also a big help for the show and the network, so if you guys would, we'd greatly appreciate it if you guys would use that tip and donations link at GSMCPodcast.net. But with that being said now, we can jump straight into our first topic. Very interesting comments made from Cincinnati and specifically their owner, Mike Brown, with obviously T. Higgins being franchise tag this year. He already signed the tender. He is going to play this year under that franchise tag, and a lot of conversations have been around how can the Bengals afford, all three of them, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. But the more that this carried on, franchise tagging him, leaving him as the only franchise tag player for 2024, this one seemed like the most obvious one that wasn't going to get done. I never felt too confident that, as much as the Bengals said that they wanted to extend him, that they'd like to have him on their team, I never felt that this was going to go beyond, really, this year if he got traded, but really for sure not next season. It looks like this year is going to be the last year for T. Higgins on the Cincinnati Bengals, and not just from my intuition, but reading into some of the comments that their owner Mike Brown said recently, starting with Jamar Chase. Jamar Chase also, just before I get into T. Higgins, training camp is starting, but he is at the practice facility for the Cincinnati Bengals, but he's actually not taking part in practice as well. Similar to Brandon Ayuk, similar to Jordan Love, they're there, they're just not practicing, trying to get a contract extension. And I know, based on the rookie deal, in terms of just base salary, Jamar is making something criminally low for 2024. I think it's close to $5 or $6 million just off of his rookie salary for this year. So you can't blame him, but also from that standpoint, he just became extension eligible. So I didn't think he was going to hold in at this point, but with that being the case, the Bengals owner, Mike Brown, made his intentions crystal clear when talking about Jamar Chase and how he felt about getting an extension done with him. He said that they are going to bend over backwards to make it happen. Weird comment to make. You could have said it somewhere else. We're not going to go there, but you get what he was trying to say. Trying to get it done as much as possible with Jamar. Obviously, the connection with Joe Burrow. You'd want those two guys on the team for the next 10 years, obviously. But it's going to cost a lot of money. And you get an idea with Mike Brown that he wants this to get done as soon as possible. But he also said that he doesn't know exactly when it's going to get done, because this year was the first year he could be extended. It was the first year he was eligible. But again, we're talking about a lot of money, and you're almost competing with Brandon Ayuk now, CD, to get a deal done. And ideally, you get it done before then. But with everything else going on, I don't think that they were ready at this point in time to try and get something done with him this year. And if that's the case, they're just going to have to wait it out a bit more with him sitting on the sidelines, just being there and trying to navigate that awkward situation with your star player just sitting on the sidelines. But that's what he said about Jamar Chase, doing everything possible to get him to sign that extension to keep him for the foreseeable future. But when it came to T. Higgins, not the same sort of energy, not the same sort of optimism that you'd get when talking about a receiver that has played very well for you and has produced very well for you as well. The comments that Mike Brown said, very different to what he said about Ja'Marr Chase. He said, the pie is not going to grow. It's only going to be a certain size, but when you reach a point with your quarterback that you have to pay him a big contract, that takes a disproportionate piece out of the pie, which means you have less left to pay others. You can't just pay people willy-nilly. You're restricted on how much you can pay, and we really like T. Higgins, but he also added just briefly afterwards that that they wish to sign him, but it has to fit into a certain level that they have an idea about with how the salary cap goes, and also if they can't do that, then it just simply can't happen, which when he mentioned Ja'Marr Chase talking about bending over backwards to make it happen, you sense that eagerness, that patience almost, hopefulness that he was going to get it done, was going to do everything possible and almost impossible to make sure Ja'Marr is on the team going forward for the next 10, 8 years or something like that. But when you look at these comments made by him on T. Higgins, very much indecisive, lackluster, pessimistic, almost giving up hope, thinking that this is not going to work itself out, just almost preparing everybody for the circumstances that they're facing when most likely T. Higgins is going to move on after this year. And you understand, I understand that Ja'Marr Chase has done everything that he can on the football field to earn that praise, that sort of favoritism, you could say, for Mike Brown to make sure he's on the team. If anybody has to leave, it's not going to be Ja'Marr Chase. He's done everything. He's produced. He's been in the conversation for one of the top wide receivers since he stepped foot in the league. So you can't blame Mike Brown for saying it, but also talking about T. Higgins in this way, with having Zach Taylor and other members of that organization saying how much they want to keep T. Higgins. I feel like you didn't have to say too much of what Mike Brown said in these comments that sort of pushed everybody to the understanding that T. Higgins is not looking good right now, and don't be surprised almost when we can't sign him. We can't just pay all these people all this amount of money, basically. Don't be surprised if he moves on next year, is the kind of vibe I was getting from Mike Brown. And again, it doesn't help T. Higgins' case that he's coming off one of the worst years statistically for himself. He was hampered by a hamstring injury, but stat-wise, it was by far his worst year after coming off of 2 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons. This past year, he didn't reach that, and he was injured with that hamstring injury, like I said. And Ja'Marr Chase has just not failed to show up each and every week, even with a backup quarterback. He has shown his talent, and he's probably worth at least $32 million per year, at minimum $30 million per year. So he's going to take a big portion of that pie, like Mike Brown referenced there in his statement. So you already have Joe taking about probably a third of that, maybe more. And Jamar's probably going to take another almost third, a fourth of that pie. So that's the consequence. You can't have all these great players getting top of the market price. And same thing with the 49ers, same thing with the Cowboys. It just seems like Mike Brown was a little bit more clear about it, a little bit more blunt about it, that I just wasn't expecting, and I didn't think it was too necessary. Honestly, when I saw these comments, it really surprised me to say that you just can't pay people willy-nilly, having a cautious approach there. But with Ja'Marr, you're saying we're going to do everything in our power to do it. So that kind of message that it sends to T. Higgins, it just confirms to me that this is going to be his last year. And if T. Higgins wasn't believing that after seeing these comments, I don't know what else you needed to hear to believe that at this point. But with him being franchise tagged, obviously, the deadline to negotiate a long-term deal has already passed. So he will be playing this year on the tag, like I mentioned, and he will be a free agent officially again next year in 2025. But now, this could honestly be a good thing and a bad thing for, or a good thing for T. Higgins and also a good thing for the Bengals. Yes, you're most likely going to lose him. That's my estimation. But this year, 2024, could be one of the best, or you could try to make it one of the best if you're the Bengals and if you're T. Higgins. T. Higgins, in some of the comments he made in returning to training camp, he said that he came back mostly to try and win a Super Bowl. And I think those are realistic expectations that should be something that the Bengals are shooting for, because everything right now is getting pushed to the middle of the table. You're going all in, just adding to the group of teams that have said that already this year. You're going all in this year. Joe Burrow's back. Hopefully you have him for at least 15, 14 games of the season. Jamar is probably going to play. He's just going to hold in for right now. And you have T. Higgins at least playing for you this season. This could all work out beautifully for the Bengals with having their quarterback back, having their 2-star receivers, being a juggernaut on offense to where you get into the playoffs. You usually perform well there when Joe Burrow is healthy and able to play. So that's a good inclination for the Bengals. So if that all works out, they could have a great year this year. And then by that point, you satisfy yourself if you're the Bengals. You get as far as you can. Maybe you reach another Super Bowl. Maybe you get to the AFC Championship game. And then also for T. Higgins, knowing that this is a contract year, you're going to ball out. Hopefully you stay healthy. You produce another 1,000-yard season, or just your best season in the NFL overall. And not only does that help the Bengals in reaching their goals, but it also helps T. Higgins. Unfortunately, it might mean that he prices out for the Bengals, that they just can't afford him based on the numbers, hopefully, that he produces. Then you hit the free agent market again. His agent is David Mulugheta, has negotiated and agreed to a lot of major deals for his client. So if T. Higgins does what he does on the football field, he reaches that potential, hopefully exceeds it in 2024. It'll be a great thing for the Bengals to produce on the field, but also for himself. It'll give David Mulugheta more of an incentive to get him a massive deal next year. And then almost everybody wins. The Bengals get one more year at the top level with T. Higgins, and T. Higgins can hopefully find himself with a brand new team and with a lot of money in his pocket, ideally. So that's the belief that I'm feeling right now. I had that feeling before, but now after these comments, it almost has confirmed it that, the Bengals want Jamar Chase at any cost, but with T. Higgins, they're just going to wait and see. And is it fair? Probably not, but even with that, you kind of got that sense, at least I did, that this was going to be it. And it just comes down to the fact that they have their hands tied, so they're going to have to make a choice. And kudos to them for making a choice almost now and not hanging around the rim like some other teams. But that's where the situation stands right now for the Bengals. We're going to leave it at that and move on with our next topic, talking about Hassan Reddick, where we came from at the start of this offseason in terms of Hassan getting traded and why he didn't show up. And now that he's officially said that he's holding out, when can we expect to see him? How could this all be resolved? Sooner the better for the New York Jets. We're going to talk about everything that led to this when we return after this break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.